Defence Minister Richard Marles has defended his decision to spend millions of dollars on taxpayer-funded flights. Revelations emerged this week the minister had spent more than $3 million, including being flown from Canberra to Geelong, as well as between Sydney and Brisbane for a Matildas game. Experts rubbish claims this week that national security was a reason to keep the flight details under wraps. Well, joining me live is Green Senator and Defence spokesman David Shoebridge here in the studio. And David, let's start with these Richard Marles flights. I understand you kicked this off with an FOI into his flights and the PMs. Were you shocked with the figures that it came up with?
Well, I was pretty astounded when the figure came up at $3.6 million, and that's for the Defence Minister, not for the Prime Minister, for the Defence Minister. Now, there are reasons why the Defence Minister may have some special purpose flights, may have to go to Washington for a particular negotiation, may have to go visit some military bases. But $3.6 million? I mean, he's only been in office for a bit over 12 months. We were shocked by the figure, but then we were also astounded that they're continuing to refuse to say where he went. And we have this rubbish security reason that somehow if they tell us where the Defence Minister went 12 months ago, it's going to show some pattern of life, and that pattern of life will somehow risk the security of the Defence Minister. It's likely to show a pattern of flights between Geelong and Canberra and him using a hugely expensive...
So you don't buy the national security excuse at all?
No, and look, this review was started under Dutton, when Dutton was the Defence Minister, and it was completed under Marles, and his office had direct input into the review. And look, if anyone seriously thinks telling us where the Defence Minister went 12 months ago is a security risk, I think they should get a better security consultant.
So you'll be pushing with the Coalition in the Senate for the release of information on these flights. Do you think you'll have success there?
Well, look, I'm hopeful. What's been astounding about this is just how angry the broader public is about it. You know,
yeah.
and
maybe
and
not so astounding when they're trying to book flights and it costs a bomb.
Well, yeah, it's the only thing I'll say about special purpose flights is they make Qantas flights look cheap. But no, we'll be pressing. And I think the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister should review where they're at on this. When Bronwyn Bishop can come out and make Richard Marles look bad on special purpose flights, you know they've got a PR problem.
But he spent a lot of time as acting PM. So doesn't he have the same flight rights as the PM in those circumstances?
In which case, show us where you went.
Right.
Normally when he's flying as acting PM, he lands and puts an Instagram post out. I mean, it's hardly a bloody security issue.
OK, well, that actually sounds pretty fair. But look, I mean, he said something on Friday on the Today Show, actually, that he said that he is the approver so that he only took a fraction of the flights. Does that make sense to you?
Well, his $3.6 million is only a small pool of all the other special purpose flights that have been taken by
So you don't think
others.
he disputes the $3.6 million?
No, but there's a simple way of him resolving this. If he says all the flights are for a reasonable purpose, show us where you went.
All right, you heard Peter Dutton before. Sounds like if he gets elected, we get another referendum. What do you make of that?
Is that really his policy?
That's what he just said on Sunday Agenda.
He wants 2 referendums on voice and then voice.
Well, he just doesn't want the voice enshrined.
Yeah, I mean, he says that he's comfortable with consulting, he's comfortable with talking with First Nations people, says they should be heard, but he doesn't want it in the Constitution. It is the most complicated reason to say no.
Look, having said that, I reckon if it just goes down, it'll be people who don't mind a voice but don't want it permanent, right?
Well, I think
people don't like in Australia changing the Constitution.
Well, people don't like changing the Constitution, and that's why a scare campaign can be so effective, even though this is a very modest change. This is about saying there will be a voice, there has to be a voice, you have to listen to it before you make decisions that are going to seriously impact on First Nations peoples. And I've got to say, why that is such a scary prospect for the Coalition, I find hard to understand, unless it is they don't want to have to listen to First Nations people. And I think at the root of it, that's really what Dutton's opposition is. He would like to be able to legislate as he sees fit, impact First Nations people, redo the intervention, all of those things without listening.
Has Anthony Albanese done the best job he could selling this thing?
Well, I mean, this isn't how the Greens would have run the campaign. We probably would have started with truth and had a campaign on truth and started telling the truth and then moved to voice. But we're where we are. And, you know, my party is firmly committed to getting this referendum up. We think it'll make a significant difference. And we can't see an argument against saying you have to listen to First Nations peoples before you legislate or make policy for them.
John Farnham getting involved, will it make a difference?
Well, I mean, he's the voice. I think it actually
Peter Dutton said, try to understand, it's a relevant line there.
Yeah, well, it goes to show he knows John Farnham, right? But if you ask me who's going to be more persuasive in the next few weeks, John Farnham or Peter Dutton, I'll put John Farnham forward every day.
All right, I need to ask you briefly about the Senate. It looks like you're going to block the PRRT tax changes and the superannuation tax changes because you want more from government. But are you really going to oppose these revenue measures?
Well, what we've said to Labor is when it comes to the PRRT, the gas industry has had a gift, a complete gift from Labor and the Coalition for decades, paid literally no tax, when other countries, such as in Scandinavia...
But when push comes to shove, OK, you want them to pay more tax, but when push comes to shove...
Pay some tax, it'd be a nice start.
Yeah, but when push comes to shove and the government says no to you on this, presumably, I assume you'll just back the changes.
Well, Labor's got a choice. They can work with the Coalition and weaken environmental laws, weaken their already very weak tax and get it through, or they can work with the Greens and strengthen the tax. That's really Labor has a choice.
And on super?
They don't control the Senate.
And on super, do you think you'll end up passing that?
Well, on super, what we've said very clearly is this is a tiny measure. This is an increase in tax on balances above $3 million. Like, it's a tiny fairness measure. And what we've said is, if you want to have a serious fairness measure, well, then also allow superannuation to be paid on parental leave. That'll have a significant impact for women. It'll cost about $200 million a year.
Yeah.
And it'll go some way to bridging that superannuation gap, that gender superannuation gap. Now, again, Labor has a choice. They can work with us to implement what is actually Labor Party policy and get it through the Senate and have a better package, or they can be bloody minded.
Briefly and finally, the IR reforms, what's your view on those?
Well, same job, same pay. That should be a pretty basic principle as a fair go for Australians. I see and I think the Greens collectively see these reforms as a modest step. And who would suggest that you should have two people working next to each other doing the same job, one getting proper pay and one getting, 2/3 or 3/4 of the pay? That's not fair, and we should legislate to fix it.
Green Senator David Shoebridge, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Cheers, Andrew.